everyone. Welcome to the Be Freaking Awesome podcast. I am one of your hosts, Sammy Kinnison, here with Angela Belford and very special guest, Drew Taylor. Drew, we're going to give you a moment to introduce yourself, but first, Angela, will you share us a little bit of context about why we have Drew, how you know Drew and why he's here on the podcast today?
Yeah, well, as you know, this fall we are working our way through different chapters of my book, and so thanks for joining us for our the book club edition of the podcast, if you will. And I am excited to have Drew because he made a liar out of me. On episode 5 of the podcast, I say I will never help somebody else with their book. And last summer, Drew was like, "Hey, will you help me with the logo for my coaching business?" Because he was already an existing client of the Belford group. Yes, I'd be delighted. We start geeking out on coaching. Why are you needing a coaching logo? And he's like, "I'm writing a book." I can help you with that because I'd already geeked out on his content by the time I, opened my mouth. So it's been a, it's fun process because it was Drew. It's lovely to have a client that is also a coach can also like talk you down when you are having like I'm so sorry I messed this up kind of day. So anyway, it's been fun. We've been sort of developing. We weren't supposed to launch our book at the same time. His was supposed to be done way before mine, and his kindness of things just glitches happening. He's here now. Hooray! With the book. Hooray!
Anyway. He's been a longtime client of the Belford Group, and so you have helped lots of different projects. But yeah. Drew, would you take a moment and just kind of introduce yourself to everyone listening? Kind of tell us a little bit about who you are.
Absolutely. I am an integrative business coach, is the term that I use. Mm-hmm. And I've worked with, at this point, I've had, I think it's about 4,500 coaching calls with clients on business related things, which took me into more deeper level things when I couldn't solve the problem with logic and they were still having the same issues. Then my search was, what's the next level down? What's the next level down? And that's led me to the NLP and some of the more unconscious level change work that I do with people now.
That's
for exciting. Those that don't know what NLP is, you want to tell us what that is?
Yeah, Neuro-Linguistic Programming. Basically, it's the study of communication and the study of communication on the unconscious level. And they took some people that were really, really good with certain speech patterns and studied them, and then wrote books and developed, basically reverse engineered NLP, which is super effective communication, and helps get to the root of the problem to help people change.
This is tiniest side note. This morning, actually like an hour ago, when I was dropping off my 4-year-old at school, and he was talking about how his younger brother, who's 1, he can't talk yet, so we don't know what he means. And I was like, yes, but he actually does communicate with us, even though he doesn't use words. He's like, what does communicate mean? So then I was having to explain what it means to communicate. He's like, but you can't communicate without words. And I'm like, but you can. Like, tell me I was like, what am I feeling right now? And I made an angry face. And he goes, you're feeling angry. And I was like, see, I didn't use words. You didn't know that. Can you show me like what it would look like to be happy? And he then makes a big smile. And he was like, and I was like, you didn't use any words. And he goes, so interesting. And then starts talking about all the things that his brother is communicating, like at that present moment. But he was like, look, he's kicking his legs. He's waving his arms around. And he's saying, yeah, 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 yeah. He's happy right now. He looks really excited. So it's not the full neuro-linguistic processing programming, but it was like a 4-year-old level of like, we're going to start just doing these building blocks of we communicate in a way without words all the time. And his mind was blown. And I'm like, you do this to me all the time. You absolutely communicate without words every day, every moment. When you get real grumpy and stomp your foot, you didn't use words, but whatever. Anyway, I love that we're talking about this today, and it's very fresh on my mind how to explain it at a toddler level, which is fun of being a toddler mom.
When he is a communication coach in his 20s, it will be like, no, I've been studying this since I was 4. Because
Really, since he was 2. I think having me as a mom has definitely skewed his learning, and he says a lot of things that I'm like, I don't think 4-year-olds say these kinds of things very often, but that's fine. We'll go with it.
Drew, you have a couple of toddler humans in
I
your
do.
life.
Almost 3-year-old and just turned 1-year-old. So yes, it's an interesting journey. And what's really cool is some of the stuff that we'll probably talk about today. Like it's that age range where we like the ego is developing. They've got like some of these beliefs and things that come along are happening at this time because they're so impressionable. And it's cool to see the way that like to coach to certain things and then to actually see real time the way that tiny humans are developing.
Oh yeah. And I think I have to catch myself in the pendulum swing sometimes of like every single thing I say and do matters. And I have to be hyper aware because this is so impressionable and you're going to like change the trajectory of their life right now. And it's like, you are going to change the trajectory of their life. You can't escape that. And if you walk around with every single interaction bearing the weight of the whole trajectory of their life, you are going to be so exhausted from how heavy everything is that you're carrying. And so sometimes you also just have to be and go about it. And it sort of feels like, whatever it is, taking the red pill or the blue pill, whatever the pill is that you know too much. This is sometimes what it feels like raising kids while all of this is in my brain is I know a little bit too much and I kind of have to just let some things happen sometimes.
Yep. And everybody has baggage. Like you're not going to get through like raising a child without them having some sort of baggage, and that's totally okay. Because even if you do it all right and they're watching you and modeling you and they just make one tiny decision and that turns into a belief that limits them and you did everything right, you're still going to end up with some baggage that needs to be resolved.
Well, and they're going to interact in the world too. So even if you did quote everything perfect, which I don't really think is a realistic thing that a parent could do, but even if you did, they're going to interact in the world. You want them to socialize with other children, and other children are kids, and they say things sometimes that we then take really significant. Anyway, there's all sorts of inputs in our kids' life, not just us as parents, which I think is also something that we can help release sometimes our parents from, like, well, I have all this baggage, but it's like your parents were probably doing the best that they could with the tools that they had at the time. Even if their best may not have been that great, they still were probably doing the best with the situation that they had. And you have the world around you. I don't know if we're on a tangent or not, or if
We
we're
are
just like
not.
jumping
Thank
in
you
deep.
for such a beautiful segue into kind of what we're talking about. Before we get into, I have said this a lot lately regarding what your parents did, because someone said to me recently, Angela, I know you're saying that it's not because of their parents, but I'm telling you that, like, I know what their siblings are like as well. You would be shocked how often this is the conversation that I have with people. And I'm going to beat my drum one more time, which is that your parents, whether you believe they were doing the best they could or not, it's irrelevant. They may have inflicted wounds. They may have given you baggage. If you are 18 years old, it is now your responsibility to heal. It is not. So this idea of like people blaming their parents for everything that's wrong in their life is invalid in my perspective. You can identify the cause. You can help. That may help you understand. I had to get to a point where I had to like imagine what it was like for an 18-year-old kid to have a 2-year-old and a newborn and be a single mom and go, oh, in that scenario, I might have given up my baby as well for adoption. Right. It helped me to understand her, but it is my responsibility to heal. And it is, if you are 18 years old, it is your responsibility to heal, no matter what has happened or been inflicted. You may have to develop some skill sets for like holding boundaries if they continue to inflict their pain on you. Like, that's a different conversation. But anyway, I just want to say before we start this conversation of things that happened to you as a kid, you formed beliefs and you formed ideas of how the world worked from a little kid's perspective. And now as an adult, you have an opportunity to decide, is that perspective serving you? You know, your parents taught you to look both ways before crossing the street. And I hold that you should hold on to that. Like, we should still keep doing that. Right. But if your parents taught you don't talk to strangers, they were doing it to keep you safe. And now you have an opportunity to re-look at that and to decide if it's serving you.
We live by metaphors here in this space, I feel like. And I think that there are some people, Angela, who I know push back against you on this. They're like, but no, but it was the parents and blah, blah, blah. If you were to put this in a work context and you found an accounting error in your business and you're like, wow, the bookkeeping was done wrong and this is a huge error. Let's take a moment and assess who did this? How did it happen? Why did it happen? What led to this happening? Sure, all of those things are important questions, but at some point you need to fix the accounting error. Like, you don't just want to sit and ride with this bookkeeping error that's going on, and you just sit there and be like, well, it was not my fault, it was somebody else's fault. Now I'm just going to stare at this error for a long time because it wasn't me who did it. And it's like, that would not make sense in a business context. In a business context, you would say, we need to address the error. By all means, it can be important to understand where it came from, why it happened, how can you set boundaries so it doesn't happen again, different things like that. And you got to fix the error and you got to address it. Mm-hmm. Anyway, somebody needs that business metaphor to say, well, maybe I need to address this. There you go. Left brain side of encouragement to go process some of your emotions.
And fault and ownership are two different things. Like, fault is disempowering to the person who's blaming, because as long as you're blaming, you aren't owning the reality of the situation you're in. And until you own that, you can't do anything about it. So yeah, that's a really good point.
Ooh, wait, say more words about that.
So all of the experiences that happen to us or for us or whatever it is that we believe, we ultimately have to own those as ours and our experiences, because if they're not ours, if it was our parents' fault, then it's our parents' responsibility to fix it. And whether we are consciously saying that or not, we're keeping ourselves off the hook for creating change, because we haven't owned the fact that whoever did it to you, it's kind of irrelevant. You have that experience. It is within you. The experience happened before. So what's being carried is what's within you. And that's the thing that you have to own to be able to resolve it.
See, and that's why I think it's super empowering about this idea, is that it's not your parents, because if it's all about them, then you're stuck. And so absolutely, it's like we talk a lot, and in the first book, and I reiterate in the second book, no one can make you feel anything, which is true. And there are people in the world that say things that may not realize that that's going to hurt my feelings, or that upsets me, and that is that's a trigger for me, or that I'm trying to heal from that trigger. And then if I'm in relationship with somebody and I tell them, hey, it's really hard for me when you say this, and I'm working on myself, then if they keep saying and doing the thing that like pushes your buttons, or they don't seem to care, then that's giving you more information that you can then take responsibility and be like, oh, well, I guess I'm going to not allow this person in my life. I promise this podcast is not about boundaries. I don't feel like I know boundaries well enough to teach it, but there is an element to where when I can decide that no one else can make me feel something, then I get to have so much more freedom and so much more power. And for those control freaks in the audience, so much more control. If you keep your remote control of your emotions in your own hands. So, Drew, where does, from your perspective, talk a little bit about parents and perceptions. Why don't you talk about the power of perception?
I'll tell you through the lens of what I went through probably 10 years ago. And I got to a point where I was very disempowered. And my first thought was, it's the world. Like the world, the situation, the external reality that I'm in, that's the problem. Like that's the enemy, that's the thing that's wrong. And at a certain point, I came to the realization of that's not the case. So if the reality wasn't the problem externally, then I had to be the problem. Must be something wrong with me. I must be faulty.
So when you say there must be something wrong with the situation, so you mean work problem, relationship problem, those things. So then your probably temptation was, I should change this. I should change jobs. I should change my business. I should change my business, right? That's the temptation when you think it's the world.
Yes, absolutely. And I had seen some in myself and in a lot in other people where they say, my job's the problem. And then they go through 10 jobs and they still have the same problem. And I realized, well, if that's true, then that can't be the problem. And it can't be one of, a job or a relationship or some other thing that's external. And so I went to the opposite, which is, I'm defective. There's something wrong with me. I'm just not meant for, all of this. Like this is too much. And I must be broken.
Also not a helpful perspective to have, actually. So first, I'm going to change everything about my external circumstances. Now, I mean, did it feel empowering to believe that? Or was it more like, I mean, it doesn't sound empowering. It sounds more like discouraging and like, what was that like to think it was just all you?
Well, I attempted to then fix me and from a situation which was impossible, right? Because I wasn't ultimately the problem. And yet when you go down that road, I just got to a point where I realized like I don't know what the other direction is, but the one direction is I'm the problem, I'm broken. And that's not as anybody could probably guess, it's a super dark direction. And I realized like no matter how painful whatever other path would be, I had to go a different direction. And what I ultimately realized and was finally over time able to put into words is that it wasn't external reality. It wasn't me. It was the thing that I experienced external reality through, which is my perception. Like these filters, these things, the beliefs that were not really mine. I picked them up when I was little, or I picked them up in some, traumatic situation or some stressful thing. And what I was looking through at the world, the way I was experiencing it, that was the problem. And also the solution. Once I was able to clean the windshield, if you will, that I was looking through, I realized like, oh, this isn't me or the world. This is this other thing in between I'm experiencing it through.
We talk a lot about swinging on the pendulum. If you're at one side of the pendulum and you swing kind of to the other, and then when we can settle in the middle, and that's what it sounds like. It's like, oh, I thought it was the world. I thought it was me. No, it's actually literally the place in the middle, this perception of how you see things. And I would say also how you hear things. It's not, I mean, perception in cases, not just visual seeing, but also hearing. I love for those of us that are of a certain age, that we used to use the radio to tune in to listen to music. And when you were, especially we live in Northwest Arkansas, where you go down the mountain and you would get to a point where you were like around every curve, not able to hear clearly what the song was that was playing. But I think we can talk it even with Bluetooth headphones, even in modern thing, where it's like, did I cut out? Is it crackly? Am I getting a clear signal? can really impact whether or not you are understanding the communication, the conversation correctly. So you mentioned traumatic things that happen to us. I want to reiterate and remind everyone of our definition around here of trauma is anything that happens to you that your brain can't make sense of. And kind of my hypothesis in my book is that when we're a little kid, there's a lot that we can't make sense of. If you don't get invited to the sleepover when you are in 6th grade, then that must mean something. It must mean that, there's people don't like me. I don't belong. I'm not lovable. We can make it mean all sorts of crazy things. And so what you're saying is that then put a level of film on my glasses that I was seeing the world, and a level of even in the how I hear things from then on out, until I take a chance and do something different, right? So how do you propose to people that they begin to, and maybe even share how you began to see your perception as different, and how did you begin to make that shift?
Yeah, it's a great question, because it was a gradual thing where I started to realize that to separate myself and my perception. Like at first, I think a lot of people just think they are their perception. And so it's them and their perception and the world. And so to start to remove that, there's little things, one of which is listening to the voice in your head. If you listen to that voice, you start to realize, like, well, this is mom's voice, or this is dad's voice, or this is some other person that I had picked up and then adopted into myself. And now when that voice comes up, it's actually not me. The things it's saying to judge me or criticize me or whatever it is isn't my voice. And just starting to hear that separation can help take it away from the fact that before that you just think you're talking bad to yourself, but it's not really you saying those things. It's something that you've picked up, age 0 to 7, and has just been with you ever since.
Sort of like when we hang out with our friends and they have a little saying that they say all the time that then I'm apt to pick up. I love picking up people's accents. I say "a" constantly when I am in Canada, and it's similar to that. So when you say it's not ourselves, it's like something that it just became a habit for you because you heard it so often from other people, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And then another way is looking for disproportionate responses to events. So when my response is out of proportion to the thing that happened, so somebody spills something and I totally lose my mind, or some small thing happens and my response is a lot bigger, that is a challenge in your perception. And it goes back to some sort of baggage, either an emotion or a limiting belief, and something that is. So that's another way to follow the trail back, to start to become aware, because the first step of changing is the awareness of whatever it is. So you can follow it back to become aware of what the root of that is.
One of the things that I really appreciate about along this lines that you talk about in your book is that if you can identify if it's your perception, if you react in a way different than someone else might react. Like if something happens and you see somebody else react in a way that is like, oh, okay, no big deal. And for you, it like hugely angers you, it could be also an indicator that maybe there's something there. And even that idea of like, I mean, it reminds me of the classic little farmyard joke that is like, the bird falls out of the sky because it's frozen and it lands on the ground and then somebody poops on it and then, oh, that must be really bad. Well, maybe not. It's not really bad if that then, revived it back to life. Anyway, I should know the joke before I kind of reference it, but basically that things that happen to us that could be perceived as bad might end up working to our good as well. And we're not talking about abuse and trauma, and we're not discounting the ills of the world, but recognizing that even those capital T traumas, meaning things that a therapist would consider a trauma, we can still integrate those into our lives and recognize that we developed from those resilience. We developed strength of character. We developed empathy. I mean, I have empathy for people that have been through hard things because of what has happened to me. That is not to say good came of my trauma, but it's this very nuanced thing. And I think sometimes when people haven't done any of their healing work, they can hear this conversation and say like, oh, you're saying it was good that I was abused. I'm like, nope. I am not saying it was good.
I heard a quote recently that talked about anything that comes from this trauma or abuse in particular that could be defined as good is all to the credit of the person who developed that character, and none of the credit to the person who did these things to you. That is how you were able to overcome in different ways, and how you have been able to own that story and make it different. So being able to empathize with people who've had hard things is credit to you, not any credit to an abuser. And I felt like that was a really important distinction at times, that we're not trying to, do not want to give credit, be like, oh, wow, well, they did this good thing for you because now you've developed this resiliency about you. It's like, nope.
My parent was an alcoholic.
Thing.
And I became responsible. Isn't that great that I had an alcoholic parent? No, it's not great that you had an alcoholic parent. And good on you that you took a very hard thing and you turned that for good.
Yeah. Going back a second to the perception of things. There's one that it sort of made me giggle sarcastically. People talk about don't cry over spilled milk. Said no pumping mom ever, because I just left out of the season of life where I was breastfeeding and pumping and things like that. And if I produced milk with my body and went through all of the effort of all of this thing, and then it just got whoopsies, spilled it. No, now it's gone. It was very upsetting to me to be like, I worked really hard. Pumping and breastfeeding in general was hard for me. It was not easy. I had to do a lot of intentional effort to make it happen for as long as I was able to. And then for something to just happen and it be spilled, you're like, oh my gosh. But when you talk about the disproportionate response, somebody else who's breastfeeding would probably, and is pumping, share that kind of response. If I was talking about I spilled a little bit of the $4 for a gallon of milk, of 2% milk at the store. Now, granted, maybe milk would cost more, and there is some upsettingness to it. It is different if I'm spilling if I'm spilling 3 ounces of 2% milk versus 3 ounces of breast milk. Those responses are different, and that makes sense. And that follow, I can see where that's not necessarily a trauma response from me to have been upset or disappointed that I worked really hard for something and then it didn't work out the way I wanted it to. It's not to say that there are going to be no things that upset you in this world, but sometimes the things that upset you, it's figuring out that balance. Because I think that sometimes in these conversations that we're having with traveling light and power perception, a wrong conclusion could be that I'm not supposed to feel any emotions, and that everything is just supposed to be flatline the rest of my life. I think that's not the right conclusion. There are things that are going to impact us by all means. What do we do with that response? What do we do? How do we interact with others? Are we causing pain? And when we're feeling pain, there's so much kind of after that. Anyway, there's just my thought about this. You mentioned specifically something getting spilled, Drew, and I was like, spilled milk can be truly upsetting for a pumping mom.
And that's a reasonable response
Right.
because of all the effort that goes into that. And I think it's really just developing the habit of reviewing your responses, because we're naturally going to think our response was proportionate. It was the right response in the moment. It's, do we have any kind of review to go back and say, yeah, that was reasonable. Like I say it in my book, like I got punched in the face, I got upset. Like that's reasonable response. But to get that upset about a smaller thing,
right,
to actually have that review is an important filter. And yes, emotion is very important. It's pushing it down actually creates more problems later on anyway. And so everyone should be feeling a broad range of emotions throughout their life. It's just when those extreme emotions are tied to little events, and it's not really even bad. It's just, that's the guide.
It's information. Yeah.
Yeah. It's less around judgment. It's more around what can I use to heal myself. And it's the same thing with traumatic events or any event of, do I believe that life is happening to me? Like life is happening to me versus, do I believe life is happening for me? And it doesn't mean that you like the things that have happened, but you are using those things to move yourself forward. Whatever has already happened, how can I move myself forward? How can I heal? How can I, resolve more things, and be a more whole, loving, caring human?
Yeah, the word evolve is the one that I have really latched onto the last couple of years, because even as I've done a lot of work on my healing, and I'm like, my perfectionism would lean itself to like, oh, one more thing I need to fix. And I was like, okay, well, what's the balance there? And I do want to evolve as a human. The things that I'm experiencing today, if 20 years from now, I'm still only experiencing those things, I haven't learned new depths of sadness and joy 20 years from now, then that's not, to me, the intentional life that I want to live. And so it's really, to me, a lot about evolving. And the other thing is that we talk about the indicator light of if you have an overblown response, but I would also, comes up for me is if you have no response, because I've been working with people over the last couple of years that have numbed themselves out to the point that like they don't feel extreme happiness or sadness. They don't feel a whole lot of anything, because their goal was to like, I never want to be angry ever again. I never want to experience that. And so when you do that, then you start to solidify your emotions and tamp everything down.
We had a friend recently, Angela, that she shared her stepmother had passed, and she's going to the funeral, and she just was like, it just is, it's whatever. And it was like, I think you're underreacting here to this situation. And then it was like this complicated spot as responding as a friend to be like, if you need to underreact right now in this week leading up to the funeral, because this is what's going to keep you safe and going to interact with your family and going to do these things. Okay. I think I can understand, but like, can we circle back later when you're in a safer spot to figure out how to express some of these feelings? Because even if you weren't super close, you still grew up with this person, you've known them for, I think she'd known them for like 30 years, and was just kind of like, oh, well, she passed. I was like, I feel like there's more going on here. And when you think about underreacting to a situation as a numbing technique, it absolutely was.
I will tell you another very difficult conversation I had. I got up in somebody's face, which I try not to do very often, but they were discounting the things that happened to them as a child, which I did for years. So I know I'm real sensitive to this. And it was like, essentially the stance was, I survived it, no big deal. why, I don't know why we're not going to literally like, oh, so what? I don't want to trigger people, but like fill in worst response, a big deal. I survived. They treated it like, don't cry over spilled milk. And I had to say to them, like, so let me get this straight. My daughter comes to you and says, I've never told anybody this, but this terrible thing happened to me when I was 14. Are you telling me that you would tell her, big deal, get over it? Or would you pause and be like, wow, that's really hard. It's not supposed to happen that way. Yes, we know life is hard and it's terrible that it happened to you. Can I hug you? Can I hold you? Do you need to cry? And then I said, after they cry and after then you can help them to see like, okay, but look, you survived it. And now you've gone stronger, and you can help them see what they've done. But what my whole perception of this book is that my first book would have said like, look at all the good that you come and look, you've overcome. And I skipped that step. So that's why I know I'm super sensitive to this. But I just last weekend, I was like, literally, she was driving and was like in her face and like, you have to acknowledge the 14-year-old you that went through this terrible, terrible thing. Let her cry, be there, be kind. I said, because what you're doing is you are abandoning that kid the way everybody in your life has abandoned you. And I thought she was going to stop the car and get out and go like, wait a minute, what? But that's what we do. But
that's interesting because we also wouldn't necessarily say that to somebody else. If somebody came to you and said, this thing happened to me, very rarely do we actually respond, big whoop, get over it. Like, move along. Life's hard. Life's not fair. Big trauma happens. Keep going. Like, we don't usually we never say that to somebody's face, and pretty rarely do we actually think that even behind their back. But why do we say it to ourselves? Anyway, it's the whole, like, if you wouldn't say it to your friend, stop saying it to you. Yes, Angela?
Oh, I'm going to disagree with you because you two have toddler parents and I've raised teenagers. And I am here to tell you that one of the things that parents do that is terrible is they discount their kids' pain. And so while we wouldn't do it to another adult, we actually do it all the time to kids. And we don't recognize that what wouldn't be hard for us because we're a grown-up human with lots of resources is hard for the person that we are talking to. Because I promise you, as a parent, there are times my teenagers are like, and I was like, oh my God, big deal.
I think you had a teenage daughter who like cried and cried and cried her senior year of high school because it was the best year of her life and nothing will ever be better than this. And
I love my family. I love my life. My family is wonderful.
And then
you know how hard it is to laugh at somebody's face when they're telling you how wonderful their family is?
It was not that hard for you, by the way. You laughed very easily in my face whenever I said those things. And you were like, I can't even handle this right now. You're being so ridiculous. And then I would just cry more. And then 6 weeks into college, I was like, oh my gosh, nothing could ever have been better than this. Like, I love it. I love the space from my family. I love my new friends. I love everything about college. High school is the worst. It did not take me long to really change my tune. But I definitely, I experienced a parent who was like, I don't know how to be there for you in this ridiculousness.
I literally used to say to my kids, like, oh, you want to cry? This was me before this book and before the last 2 years. You want to cry? Call your dad. Are you ready to solve your problems? Call me. And they did. And it worked well for me because I didn't have to deal with messy emotions. It's been such a journey. And my kids, I know some of the time got to be looking at me like, oh, feel your feelings and emotions who would never let us in the same room as her. And I'm like, I totally am like a person who has just got religion. I get that.
It is interesting. And I think it's helpful. Sometimes it's hard to talk about the growth of things. And I feel like we do a pretty good job of acknowledging that like the mom I had sometimes in my childhood and my teenage years is not the same mom that I have now. And
your husband has struggled with that.
Yeah.
Reconciling He only knows me as parent to adult children.
Right. And so there are times where there are just things that happen. Like emotions were not, it was not safe to feel emotions growing up. It was something that you did that on your own in your room. And even now, I'm really sensitive with our 4-year-old that I never want to send him to his room to go cry. Like, you can be upset, just not in front of me. And my husband has a lower tolerance for his big feelings sometimes. I think it's more like, I don't know how to say this nicely. Whatever. I love you, Chris. You're great. You do a lot of things really great. There are times where it starts to trigger and get him really activated. And so I'm like, I will go sit with you in your room while we're going to go feel these big feelings, but I'm not, unless you ask me for alone time, which I offer. We practice a lot of different things. Like, what do you need right now? Do you need to be alone? Do you need a hug? Do you need to punch your pillow? Like, what would be helpful? If he says he needs alone time, that's different to me than go to your room until you're done crying. Like, it's figuring out ways in this toddler world that I think will help him. I hope will help him, fingers crossed, when he gets older as well, to start practicing this with toddler feelings, then teenage feelings. We'll get to practice it again. And then maybe adult feelings. We'll have had like years of practice that he can be way ahead of all of us who are, re-engaging with this as adults. We'll see. It's a 20-year experiment.
And all those feelings for as parents, all those feelings can be overwhelming that children have because there are no filters on them. You get all of whatever the emotion is. And if we aren't in a good place with our emotions, that's going to be extremely overwhelming to us, which I think is what's cool about parenting young kids, that you have the opportunity, if you see it that way, of like, what is that totally overwhelmed me when my kid had this response? Now I can go sit and figure out like what it is that actually triggered me about it. Because if we can't be with the child in the emotions, then we do invalidate them. And then they make a story about themselves because their egos are developing. And it just doesn't lend necessarily to the most empowering choices. And it lends more to coping and more to getting through things versus having a more full empowered life.
Well, and I think where our space that we're trying to give ourselves grace is that we will practice our emotional regulation, sometimes like out loud and narrating it, to be like, I know you're feeling a lot of things right now. Mommy is also feeling a lot of things right now. I'm going to sit with you, but right now while I'm sitting here, I need to take some deep breaths so that I can try calm my nervous system down. And I need, like, I try to practice the things and as best I can, when I can, narrate what I'm doing to level set, to then even show like adults have feelings too within this space. It's not, anyway, it's so hard sometimes. There's so much nuance. I'll put $1 in the nuance jar. We should actually calculate the nuance jar dollars that we're going to go donate to charity one day, and we'll do something maybe end of this year. We have AI tools
Drew,
that could do that
say
now.
the word nuance every episode, and we're like, golly, we're going to have to pay $1 every time we say the word nuance. But I think it is a good word. I think because, and I recently read something that said our brains prefer two choices. We like black and white binary thinking. And I had never really thought about it as that is the preference for our brains, which makes sense when we talk about efficiency. But the thing that I'm finding is, especially in this emotional space, is that it's not just black and white. It's not just two options. It is super messy, right? In my coaching, I don't even like people when I talk to them about like where you're feeling something and where are the sensations in your body, and people are like, oh, I feel anxiety in my chest. And I'm like, anxiety is a thought. It's a word. Like, you are judging what the sensation is. Just describe the sensation that you're having. And it's so weird. And I know that there's a ton of like ton pop culture right now that says learn how to feel your feelings. And I used to have my little emotion wheel right here on my desk that would help me to figure out, what am I feeling right now? And I also know I'm in a pendulum swing where I'm like, no, you don't need to label your emotion. And there's a place for that. There's a point in time for that. And what I'm trying to figure out is that space before I even want my cognitive thought, like just what's happening here. I haven't even decided, because if you think about excitement, exhilaration, and fear, and like terror, like they're all like right in there. They're in a very narrow portion. The terror to exhilaration is a very narrow piece of the spectrum of feelings. So that's why I'm like, no, just practice getting used to what's happening in your body.
And you're not responding to the label. Anything in our experience of life, once we call it something, as soon as we put another experience in that box, whatever else was in the box has an effect on the experience you're having. So it's probably a slightly different feeling or sensation of what you've had before. And if you actually want to experience that versus all of them combined, then you don't need to label it.
I love that. Yeah, I had somebody that was working on, of course, I do a lot of speech coaching, and they were like, Angela, every time I get up to speak, like my stomach is rolling and I'm sweating and my it's hard to take a deep breath. And I go, is that bad? And they were like, oh, of course it's bad. I go, I mean, maybe that's just what your body has to do to get ready to speak. Like, what if that's just the gear up process? Like we have a launch sequence when we put a space shuttle and there's like a checklist. What if this is just your body's checklist? It may not be bad.
Which is interesting, because whether it is bad or not, it shifts the perception of that, which, circle all around, to then question that, to just notice it and bring it back to information versus the label on it. Because you can be like, wow, my hands are really clammy right now. My stomach does not feel great. I've been to bathroom 8 times today. Like, whatever it is, like, this is information. Now what do you do with it? Do you want to go speak anyway? Or do you want to find a career where you don't have to speak? I don't know, but then I would turn
interesting. It's interesting you say that, because for years I said I didn't ever experience stage fright. And since I've gotten more in touch with my feelings, I'm like, oh, I still have some sweaty and different parts of my body that are like activated. I just had numbed myself because I loved speaking, that I just ignored that completely. And now I'm like, I don't actually like that I noticed this, because I'm like, does this shirt, does it show does it look, I mean, then I get like in my head a little bit more. But okay, so Drew, you've talked about how we can begin to notice our perception. What recommendations do you have for us to begin to shift the perception, or would you say clean up or tidy? I don't know. We talked about things as a lens. So how would you
I would say a couple things. One of them is starting to look at your life as happening for you. Just that shift itself. There's an exercise in the book that says write everything out that's happened in your life as if it happened to you, like all the emotion, all of the negativity, and then rewrite it as if you're writing it that it all happened for you and what it's doing for you. And shifting that can help get away from the judgment, because when these things come up, we push them away if they're bad. And if the unconscious mind is actually helping us, like whatever it does, whatever beliefs that are negative that it adopts, if ultimately it thinks it's protecting us and we believe that, then when things pop up, we won't shove them away. And the number one thing that people can do is shift their relationship with the emotions that come up that are out of proportion, or the limiting beliefs, or that voice in their head. If we can not push it away so fast, if we can just be with it and see what is actually being said, what is the feeling telling me, then if we're not afraid of it, we can actually start to look a little closer at it. And sometimes just the awareness of it will change and let whatever it was go, or allow you to communicate with your unconscious mind. Because I think that's the number one problem is we have these feelings, these things that pop up, and then we have our logic, and we can't communicate between the conscious and the unconscious mind. So I use the analogy of an escalator. If the escalator is going down and we're sprinting up it, we're going to make progress until we sleep, until we rest, until we stop, and it pulls us back down. And so if we can learn to communicate better with our unconscious mind and flip it the other way, then we can rest a little bit more and we're still going the right direction. And so just getting to the belief that our unconscious mind is there to help us, that all these beliefs that surface are there for resolution, that they wouldn't be coming up consciously to us if we weren't in a place to be able to address those or go find a resource to heal. That's, I think, the number one thing, because most of us, we say, oh, I don't like that feeling, push it away. Oh, that thought's bad, run away from it. Like, oh, I'm going to whatever, have a drink, or I'm going to go do this other thing, or get away from this stuff that has come up. And because it's a threat, it doesn't have to be.
What's interesting is that I think it was last year, maybe the year before that, I went through this process with my therapist where I acknowledged, I knew for a fact that I was like, I have a hall closet in my brain that is full of monsters. And it's like probably in like the front lobby of my brain. I walk past this closet all the time, and I'm very aware that the closet full of the monsters is like right there. And it's too terrifying to open it. I just can't. And we talked about it for months, that I would just stare at the door of this closet in my brain. And when I finally hit a point where it's like, okay, we're going to address the hall closet, we're going to go clean out all the monsters, almost in just the act of acknowledging it, everything became less terrifying. And like opening the closet door, it felt like a kid. Like, you know, you think there's a monster in your closet and you go look there and there's actually nothing. It's just clothes and a coat rack and things that look scary but actually aren't. So if you really think that the monster in your closet is super terrifying, maybe it is. And maybe just by looking at it, we can take away some of the fear and the power that it has over us.
Love that. Well, Drew, what would you like to leave us with?
The one thing I did want to talk about briefly was around the limiting beliefs, like how we pick these things up. And from the MER, mental and emotional release perspective, you're basically allowing the unconscious mind to take you back to the root of the belief that's limiting you. And all beliefs start with a decision. So when we were at whatever point, we made a decision that turns into a belief that affects us for a long, long time. And if we can figure out what the belief is, and we can mentally go back to that decision, then we actually have the power to change those and let go of some of those things in the unconscious mind. And so I think if we demystify some of this, it isn't so much of monsters and scary and bad things. It's like, hey, whoops, I accidentally picked this thing up. And then I turned it into a monster because my unconscious mind doesn't want me to open that door because I was 4. And if I opened the door when I was 4, I would have been eaten by the monster. But now I realize it's a stuffed animal, and I have a different relationship with the issue. And so I think just realizing that it's not like we're not bad. We are all doing the best that we can with the resources we have, and that all of these things that come up can be information that we use to empower ourselves further. That's, if anybody does anything from listening to what I've said, at least, it would just be leave the judgment out and just get the information, and then you can figure out what to do with the information.
I think that's really wonderful. if there's anybody who's listening today that's like, golly, all of this sounds kind of like a lot and I really want to dive in more, I have 2 amazing books that I can recommend for you to dive into this. The Power of Perception by Drew Taylor and Traveling Light by Angela Belford. It really helpful. A 1-hour podcast does not cover everything. So both of these books go in depth in different directions all around this. So I would highly recommend picking those up, reading it, and then let us know what you think. I'll definitely have links in the show notes for you guys where you can get those. And Drew, if somebody wanted to find you, maybe they want to do coaching or they want to just learn more, how can they do that?
Website, mypowerofperception.com, or drew@mypowerofperception.com for email.
I love it. Thank you so much. Angela, any other thoughts or remarks?
Nope. Just thanks for tuning in. And thanks for joining us today, Drew. I appreciate your time, and you have become just a model of grace for me. So I appreciate it. Always your cheerful spirit and kindness has really been great for me in this season of book publishing. So glad we were on the journey together.
I appreciate the opportunity to have friendship and to have conversations like these.
Awesome.
I love it. Thank you guys so much for listening today. And until next time, I hope you guys go and be freaking awesome.